Talking baseball, baseball and the
Welcome back, Birdland, to another episode of the Talkin Orioles Baseball Podcast. I am, of course, your host, Benny Becker. Thrilled as always, gang, to be back here sitting with you talking about our Orioles. It's been a minute, but we had a small hiatus between the end of last year and the off season. I just had to let it breathe, gang. But we are back and in full force here at Talkin Orioles Baseball Podcast. I promise you that we are not going anywhere anytime soon. We have episodes every Monday and Thursday this season, but we will be peppering your social media, whether it's Instagram, TikTok, X. Make sure you go follow us at Talkin Orioles Baseball on those platforms. We're going to have a lot of interaction between us and the fans. We want the comments. We want the questions. We're going to be using those in episodes to come as we will answer them. We will comment back. We will give our take on your opinions, but we need your opinions in order to give those takes, gang. So make sure you're interacting with us. We should have a lot of good guests this season. We're very excited to taking the next steps. Last season, we were just setting a foundation, and now we're building upon that foundation. A lot of great stuff coming, gang, but we might as well jump in because speaking of setting foundations, that's kind of what this episode is going to be. Obviously, I have months of Orioles baseball that I could talk about. We have spring training already started. Games haven't started for the Orioles yet, but around the league, there was the first spring training game today. So what better day to jump on here and start our season on the Talkin Orioles Baseball Podcast. Glad you're back with us. Glad to have you back. And I'm excited for what this season holds, not just for this show, gang, but for our Baltimore Orioles. You know I'm very optimistic. The most optimistic man in sports talk is right here in front of you. I will be realistic. I will be pessimistic when it calls for it. But there's a lot of optimism, as far as I'm concerned, when viewing these Baltimore Orioles currently, gang. So we got our notes now on a laptop to my left. Not the notes in front of us on the old yellow legal pad anymore. Taking steps up, gang. We're taking steps up and forward. So if I'm glancing to my left, just know that it's at our notes to keep us on track because there's a lot to talk about, as you can see. So we're just going to start, gang, with out with the old, okay? We have some out with the old and in with the new, but we're going to start with out with the old, as we know some big names are no longer with us, gang. So starting a bit on a negative note, but a lot of positivity, not only in the next segment to come, but also in this segment. So let's just start with the biggest of the names, Corbin Burnes. We're about a year removed from when we brought him in to be our ace last year, and there was a lot of excitement, gang. I thought he might win a Cy Young. Hell, I was probably convinced he was going to win a Cy Young for us. Certainly that did not happen, although for most of the season he was in talks in that Cy Young category. So frankly, it was a good move for us, especially when we moved some guys who were kind of stuck. You know, there was a log jam. Guys that, even coming into this year, if they were on our roster, don't necessarily have a clear path to playing time or even a roster spot, okay? So let's take a step back on some of these negativity thoughts that I know is around Birdland. I know there's a lot of negativity right now around Birdland, specifically when it comes to not bringing back Corbin Burnes. Now, he signed a 6-year deal worth $210 million with the Arizona Diamondbacks. Now, gang, I've heard rumors we outbid the Diamondbacks. I heard rumors we offered Burnesy more than anybody else. Whether that's true, whether Mike Elias made those deals or not, or made those offers or not, he didn't take them. He never took them if they were offered. And if they weren't offered, it's probably for the best, gang. He's 30 years old, and I know it's a tough pill to swallow, But truly, it might be for the best, gang. He's 30 years old now. It's a 6-year deal. Now, I'm not saying that Corbin Burnes can't be an ace or at least a number 2 in 5 to 6 years. But I think we saw some cracks in the armor, some chinks in the armor last season when we had him. Now, don't get me wrong. He pitched phenomenal for most of the season for us. About 3/4 of the year, I'd say. Had a very good first half of the season. But then the first half of that second half, he was a bit of a liability, gang. Now, I understand losing him creates a void at the top of the rotation. And it may be a big issue. It may be as big of an issue as Birdland has been chattering about this offseason since we lost him. Who's our ace? We don't have an ace. I get that's how it feels right now, gang. Right now, I understand that there might be that void up top the rotation in a lot of people's minds. But again, we saw Corbin Burnes be a bit of a liability when he wasn't getting the outs that we're used to him getting. And then once runners got on, he couldn't keep any runners on. And then finally, when he started pitching well again, it was still like a bit of a thing in the back of his mind. He was having to change how he throws, which he doesn't want to do. It makes him a little uncomfortable. It means that we're not getting the exact results that we expect from him, even if they were very much above average at that point. But frankly, moving forward, the older you get, the less athletic you get, the maybe slower your pitches get. Holding men on is only going to become more and more of a liability. When does it get to the breaking point? If your walks and hits reach a certain metric, well, then it becomes a very big problem, gang. Especially from a starting pitcher. Okay, we saw the problems with Kimbrel not being able to hold guys on last season. And that was for a inning. A starter, especially a top-line starter, a guy with a $200+ million contract, you need to be able to hold those guys on. You need to get those 5, 6, even 7 innings out of these guys. And again, at a certain age, did we start to see kind of what Corbin Burnes might become? Is that like month rough stretch that we saw from him kind of a preview of what is more likely to happen than not over the course of the next few years? I think so. Now, that's nothing against Corbin Burnes. I would have loved to have him back. Was it realistic? Probably not. And frankly, if the rumors are true that we offered him more money than the Diamondbacks, then maybe we really didn't have much of a chance at all. Maybe in his mind, he wants to go play in Arizona, where he recently built, I believe, a very, very nice house. I know he's a Cali guy. He likes the West Coast. Maybe, in his mind, Arizona was always his number one choice. And if Arizona came anywhere close to matching the number of his best offer, he was going to take Arizona. So there's only so much you can do. I don't want you to crucify Mike Elias for not bringing back Corbin Burnes, when certainly it seems like the rumblings indicate he attempted to bring back Corbin Burnes. And certainly today, in February of 2025, it may not look great. It may not feel great not having Corbin Burnes. It may suck being like, God, we gave up DL Hall and Joey Ortiz for a year of Corbin Burnes. Yeah, it's a tough pill to swallow, gang. But ultimately, it happens. And when you're a winning ball club like we have been the past couple years and expect to continue being moving forward, you're going to have to dish some prospects for one and dones. I'm sorry. D.L. Hall would have been great. But where's he going to fit on this roster this year if he was there? Joey Ortiz. Yeah, awesome. Probably would be taking Ramon Urias' spot. But frankly, is that doing him justice? Is that giving him the opportunity that he deserves? No. Now, sure, him and Jackson Holliday would probably be fighting it out more for that second base spot. Maybe they'd be in a bit of a platoon with each other. Who knows? Overall, I loved the move bringing Corbin Burnes in last year. Do I wish he was still with us? Yes. Do I wish he was still with us for the next 6 years? Gang, probably not. And that's the God's honest truth. If we had signed him to that 6-year, $210 million offer, I'd be talking it up. I'd be finding the positives in it, which are short-term for sure, but I'd be questioning, at the very least, the final 3 years of that deal. And possibly wondering if all 6 years could maybe not look great at that value. Gang, we'll find out. We'll find out. But again, maybe we matched or beat the 35 a year. Maybe we gave him that 6th year. Heck, we might have given him a 7th year. I don't know the exact offer Mike Elias gave him, but I know the rumblings indicate that we at least matched, if not beat, the Diamondbacks offer, and he still took their offer. It is what it is. Out with the old. The other big name that Birdland has been devastated about, I believe, for the last month or so since it happened. And we saw the writing on the wall much before it happened. But Tony Tater's gone. Headed to Toronto. 5 years, $92.5 million. Now there's some funkiness with the money. Could become 6-1-10. The actual, there's deferred money, so the actual payments is like $70 million, plus then deferred $5-10 million or so each year, something along those lines. It's a little funky of dealings. And I wonder, and I thought, the longer Tony sat there, that we might bring him back. Maybe he wanted the security of the extra years over maybe the extra money per year. Because if I'm the Orioles, especially when Tony's sitting there for a while, I offer him 2, maybe 3-year deal at a higher above average per year. Talking 25. Heck, maybe even 30 a year for 2 years. A part of me wonders if he takes that deal. If we offer him 2 years, 50 or 60 million. I think he does. Heck, like I said, he signed for $592 and really $570 before the deferred money. Okay? So you're talking about 18 to 14 a year. If you're giving him a bump to 25, heck, even 30, I think you might get him on the dotted line for 1 or maybe 2 years. But what does that run you? Certainly, it runs you some playing time for your young outfielders. We know Kowser has established himself in that outfield. Heston, while he hasn't made the team yet out of camp by any means, and certainly we'll talk about that move more moving forward, I think from everything I hear, Mike Elias, Brandon Hyde, it seems like Heston essentially has a spot on this roster. They've talked about how he doesn't even need to mash in spring training like he did last year to make the team this year. I think Heston has that spot. So again, you bring Tony back, maybe still you have Heston, but the playing time there starts drying up a little bit. Okay, so that doesn't even include the kind of a little farther down the line outfield prospects we have, like Vance Honeycutt, Enrique Bradfield, Dylan Beavers. So I think losing Tony Taters, who also 30 years old, like Corbin Burns, I think it was time. Okay, gang? And I know it's painful. I love Tony Taters. I think he's a great guy. I think he's a solid baseball player that continued to improve really year to year throughout his career. And that's why a guy that was a Rule 5 pick by the Orioles years ago signed a deal, give or take $100 million. Doesn't always happen like that, gang. And you got to give Santander his flowers for that. You got to give him credit for that, for developing himself into that. And that, I think, is what we're going to miss the most from Anthony Santander. The idea of kind of that leadership that he provided. He was a thoughtful hitter. The guys would always talk about how he was always talking shop, talking hitting with these other guys, with these prospects, helping them along the way. The big story last year, I remember, was how he convinced Colton Cowser to use a bigger bat, talking about how strong he is naturally. You can use a bigger bat. It's okay if then you miss more balls. When you hit those balls that you do get to, you're going to explode through them. And we saw Colton Cowser start to break through and somewhat reach that potential that we see in him. And that's primarily, I give a lot of credit to Tony Taters for that. Kind of getting in his head in the right space, opening up the idea of using the bigger bat because he's a big athlete. So I think that is a tough one. Now, certainly I would not have wanted to give Tony Taters a 5th or even 6th year like the Blue Jays did. So, frankly, if we were right around the same number that they were offering per year, we were never going to come close to that. Because truly, I think 2 or even 3 maybe was the max as far as years went with re-signing Tony. Now, is it possibly a blessing that we don't bring back a guy like Tony Taters? I think so. Now, we talked about the mentorship. We talked about the leadership with these young players. Well, I'm going to tell you a bit of a take that might be a little negative towards his leadership and his mentorship, and how getting him away from these guys actually might benefit them in the long run. Because Tony Taters is a big-time guess hitter. Like, he's going up there guessing 4 pitches. And when he guesses correctly, we see what happens. Yeah, he destroys baseballs. But personally, I feel I'd rather my hitters guess less and make educated guesses more. Now, okay, Tony's not just full-blown rolling the dice guessing. Yeah, he's making educated guesses. But this is a strategic game. It's like chess. If your opponent knows you like to do something, they're going to try and work against that, right? So, if this big-time guess hitter is starting to mentor these young players like Adley and Gunnar and Cowser and Heston and Jackson and all these guys, I'd rather him not tend them or lean them more towards just being a guess hitter. I feel like the better hitters are see it and hit it, read it. And I get that's very, very, very hard to do, but we have very, very talented players. Frankly, the list of guys I just mentioned, and potentially a few more that I didn't mention, are much better hitters naturally, have much better vision naturally, and by trait, and by training, than Santander, who again was a Rule 5 pick. Because the list I just mentioned is first rounders, number 1 overalls, first compensation pick, second rounders. We're talking premier blue chip players from low levels of baseball. At a certain point, Tony may have built himself into a very good major league hitter, or at least a very solid major league hitter. But at a certain point, maybe there's just more natural talent by these guys. And I don't need somebody who has to become a guess hitter to succeed, messing with guys who don't have to be a completely guess hitter to succeed. I do hope they learned some lessons off of that. Like, heck, maybe first pitch swinging. If I think I see this, whatever, breaking ball, fastball, whatever I'm guessing on 0-0, yeah, go after it. But maybe with 2 strikes on you, you start going back and using your talent that might be better than Tony can ever achieve, to not just swing and miss on a pitch because you're behind in the count, you're behind in the game. Your opponent can now use what they see your mental process is against you. Instead, you can then use that mental process against them. You can then see that the pitcher now thinks you're guessing on these pitches, and now I know what he's going to throw to try and get me out because he thinks that I'm looking for this in this, and I was, but now I'm off of that, and I'm more advanced than maybe Tony can comprehend. And that's nothing against Tony. It really isn't. But again, we're dealing with some of the cream of the crop as far as baseball prospects come. At a certain point, I'm going to trust those instincts. I'm going to trust that level of talent naturally to be able to do their own thing. As far as defense, too, listen, Tony became better defensively. Seemed like year in, year out, just continued to be better. But certainly he's not great. Certainly he's not going to win a Gold Glove. And he was never going to be great. And now that it's after 30 for him, that defense is probably only going to slide. Heck, if he's still a Blue Jay in 4 or 5 years, it's probably as a DH. Maybe sooner. And if not, it's probably a defensive liability situation at that point in the career. Now, again, I would have loved to have him back, just like Corbin Burnes. If they had signed Santander, I would find ways to probably talk it up. I would. Again, I'm an eternal optimist. I love Tony Taters, despite some of the things I just said about him. But frankly, it's better for the overall franchise to take that next step without him. It is. And the extra level to that, and this goes for Corbin Burnes as well, is we get compensation picks for those two. Now, one, we've seen how well Mike Elias and his team draft first round compensation rounds, second round picks. Towards the top of the draft, first few rounds, these guys seem almost can't miss with their opportunities. Knock on wood, but I love to trust in Mike Elias and his team as far as scouting and development goes. So getting those 2 extra picks are big. They're also big because now that you can trade at least the competitive balance picks, of which the Orioles have at least 1, if not maybe 2, we can now trade those in trades later this season for star players. We've seen that in recent years since they've made that rule. Heck, we did that in the Corbin Burnes deal. It allows you to not necessarily have the talent on your roster to trade for the level of talent you are getting back. And now that we have those 2 extra picks from those 2 guys leaving, guess what, gang? Now we still have a very good amount of picks in, let's say, the top 90 selections, top 100 selections. Sitting pretty. And this is how we're going to continue building championship level rosters as the years progress. Whether, again, it's using those picks to draft players who we've been very good about finding and taking, or using a couple of those picks to go out and get another star in a position that we wind up needing. When we see that that's what we need, even if it's for just a season. It's exciting, gang. It really is. Again, out with the old. Couple other names I'm going to run through very, very quickly because we spent some time on those two big names. 3 guys that are no longer with us. One I was pretty surprised, but makes sense afterwards once you see it, is Danny Colome. I love Danny. Danny was one of our best relievers, probably one of our top 3 relievers, including Batista, for the past few years. Left side, southpaw, love the guy. He signed a 1-year deal with the Twins for $3 million. Certainly we could have afforded that. And when we started letting him go, I was kind of surprised by that. But then you start looking at the roster currently constructed. And you have Keegan Aiken, who had a great year last year and has really shown strides in the past couple years. Seriously good numbers last year. Some sneaky good numbers by Keegan Aiken last year. You got Cionel Perez, who for the last few years has just been solidly consistent. Again, sometimes maybe gets a little iffy, gets a little rocky with him at times. He certainly does let on base runners more than maybe we'd like, but he gets out of those jams more often than not. And Cionel Perez has been very solid for us. And not just catching home runs in his hat in the bullpen. On the mound. Very solid. And then you got Gregory Soto, who we traded for from the Phillies last year. And I was a little down on Soto when we got him. But certainly, we were able to get a lot of potential out of him. Started off extremely ugly. But outside of that first appearance, maybe first 2 appearances, Gregory Soto was very useful for us down the stretch last year. So I like what I have for all 3 of those. As far as Soto goes, I said this when we made the trade for him, and same thing for Sir Anthony Dominguez, is we've had a lot of good success with guys like that. Hispanic relievers who are maybe a little wild when we get them and a little all over the place, finding ways to reel that in, control that talent. I mean, we've seen it with Batista. We've seen it with Cano. We've seen it with Cionel Perez. So Soto, along with Dominguez, even though Dominguez is the righty, so he's not really in this conversation, but I don't see where Danny Colome really fit in. And he was a little older, 35 years old, so about 5 to 7, I think, years older than the 3 of those lefties I just named. I don't really see the spot for him. And we have some lefties down on the farm, young kids that are either starters that could be relievers or just relievers that, hey, if and when 1 or 2 or 3 of these guys go down, we got some guys that we can rotate in and have the lefty out of the bullpen. So I feel okay with that. Jacob Webb picked up on waivers 2 years ago, and for a season and a half was surprisingly pretty solid. It's one of the guys that when we got him, it was like, all right, he might be pitching for us for a week or 2. Well, it turned out to be a year and a half. Ultimately, you let him walk. He signs about $1 million, $1.25 million with the Rangers for a season. I always liked Jacob Webb. He was solid for us, but not spectacular. And when we get to the roster construction later, I just don't see the spot for him, especially with some decent young talent, pitching talent, rising up in the minors. Some very undervalued pitching talent for these Orioles in the minors. And then James McCann, who's like kind of a fan favorite, definitely a clubhouse favorite. Going to miss his leadership. Talk about leadership we're missing. Talk about his grit. Never forget that game in the first inning when he takes the ball off the face first. And listen, you can go back and listen to me in that. I thought his career was over in that moment. I definitely thought his season was over. But his game wasn't even over. And don't forget, that was the very first game of a doubleheader. The first inning of the first game of a doubleheader. And if he has to go down there, Adley has to catch 18 innings. 17 of the 18 innings. So that was big in that moment for James McCann to find a way to stay in that game and play. Clearly, though, the Orioles want to upgrade their offense from their backup catcher, which makes sense because with Adley Rutschman taking DH days, taking days at DH, you want to keep him in the lineup. You want to keep him fresh. In order to do that, you need to put him at DH more than maybe your everyday catcher would normally do that. Okay? So he's going to miss games catching, which means your backup catcher's going to be in the lineup more often than a normal team. Meaning, a better hitting offensive catcher sounds great to me. And frankly, that's what they got, as we'll touch on in a second. But James McCann hasn't signed on with the team yet. I think he's going to wind up getting on a roster, probably before the end of spring, but certainly within a month or so of the season. Certainly there will be some kind of injury. And he played well for us the past couple years. Great clubhouse guy, great leader, great grit, an attitude you want to have in your clubhouse. And frankly, is a solid catcher as well. Puts up solid enough numbers to have a spot on a major league roster. So let some things shake out. I'm sure he'll get a job relatively soon. But we're going to miss James McCann. We will. I definitely thought there was a chance they might bring him back. But that went with the wind pretty quickly. Because Gary Sanchez got brought in relatively quickly in this offseason. And then the path just wasn't there. Not to mention, though, we have Sam Basallo knocking on the door. 20-year-old stud catcher. I mean, Sam Basallo might be up by the end of this year. I doubt he breaks camp with the Orioles. He's not even on the 40-man, I'm pretty sure. But ultimately, Sam Basallo is coming, whether it's this year or next. Believe that. So, we didn't have really the option to sign a backup catcher for multiple years with the thought that that catcher would actually be on the roster for multiple years. So I like the move of the upgrade on McCann, and that's what we're going to get to essentially next with In With The New. That was out with the old gang, now we're in with the new. These are our guys now, okay? And we like our guys, okay? Like Buck said back in the day, I like our guys. Here's some of the new names, and listen, before I get to this, I just want to start by saying I know a lot of fans out there, maybe most of the fans out there, are confused, frustrated, underwhelmed, and disheartened by the lack of maybe premium names that Mike Elias went out and brought. I get it. There were some premium names out there that you wanted us to go get. I understand that. I understand those emotions at this moment. Like we were talking with Corbin Burns. At this moment, I understand that frustration. But that doesn't necessarily mean that emotion is the correct emotion. Hear me out. Because I'm going to make a decent case for why this is actually a very nice offseason for these Orioles. And this is something we will continue digging in. Again, this is just setting the foundation. So there's not going to be many stats. There's not going to be much idea behind this or that. I'm not going to explain everything that I'm believing and why I believe that. But I'm just going to set the foundation, okay, on why we need to just take a breath, Birdland. relax a second and understand that we actually did have a very good offseason, despite what the fans might be saying right now, what they're saying on WBAL right now, heck, what they're saying in the national media right now. I think that's all good. Truly. I think all that negativity is going to brew positivity for this team. So let's talk about it. Let's round it out. Who do we bring in, gang? Well, we all probably know the names. We're going to start with Tyler O'Neill. Honestly, he was one of my top offseason targets. Again, we took a little bit of a break, and at times in this offseason, I was going to jump in and do an episode and talk about guys I want and targets, and then I decided, you know what? Let's just let it play out. Again, take a breath. Let it play out, and then we can talk about it after the fact. And so that's what we're doing now, right? But coming into the offseason, Tyler O'Neill was a guy that I personally had circled big time. I love Tyler O'Neill when he's healthy, and we'll get to that a little. But we signed him for 3 years, about $50 million, 16-ish a year. Not bad, not insane. Opt out for him after the first year. So listen, it's nice. Before I get to the idea of just Tyler O'Neill, let me just say how nice and refreshing it is that this organization is giving opt-outs to players. This is something I've been screaming about for years, because we certainly know Dan Duquette didn't give opt-outs and believe in opt-outs. We know Andy McPhail didn't give opt-outs and didn't believe in opt-outs. And frankly, for a while, Mike Elias seemed like he didn't believe in opt-outs or give opt-outs. So it's nice to be able to see kind of this catching up. This is the new age. Allow guys to opt out if they have a great year or two. In this case, 1 year. Allow them to opt out. That's going to attract more guys to your team. And also give you some options. Because it's nice if a guy opts out and then you can give a qualifying offer to him and get a pick back if he leaves. Or he opts out and then you find a way to bring him back on a better deal. It's okay. It's okay to give that kind of chance to a guy. I think it's beautiful. I think it's a great thing. And I'm very happy that it happened now with Tyler O'Neill. Because again, this was one of my top guys I wanted this offseason. He is a physical specimen, guys. Gosh, I mean, I wish I looked like that. You know? I'm sure a lot of people are the same way. He is an absolute machine. And listen, baseball's a lot of plyometrics and flexibility, and listen, size and bulk ain't always it. But frankly, when you got a guy like that, that's like the first guy off the bus sort of guy. You know what I mean? Like they talk about in football, first guy off the bus. Other team sees him and you're like, oh, he's intimidating, man. See him batting somewhere in the lineup, comes up, you're like, oh, don't want to leave one over the plate for him. Before you know it, walking him, leaving one over the plate, whatever it may be. When he's healthy, he provides excellent stats, OPS, power, especially against lefties, but he's certainly not a liability against righties on the same side. He does hit them well. And frankly, guys, he plays a really good defense. I'm talking he's won the Gold Glove twice. Sure, it was in 20 and 21, a little bit ago. But again, when you're that physical of a specimen, you're going to play a good defense. So remember, Santander was okay, but not great. So if that's the replacement defensively, that's a huge upgrade defensively. So I love Tyler O'Neill. Now we mentioned when he's healthy. He's only been healthy a few years of his career. Okay? I'd really call 3 of his 7 years. And one of them was the COVID season where they only played 60 games. So if you include that 60 games in this stat. He's only played 100-plus games in 2 out of the 7 years of his career. So being fair, 2 out of the 6 in which there were 100-plus games. Now, some have been fluky. There was like an infection in his leg the one year. That's not going to happen to you much. You know, a broken bone or just like something funky that just won't go away, something lingering that year. It happens. But I absolutely love it. And I even love it even if he misses time this season. Even if he doesn't play 100-plus games this year for us. I absolutely love it. And you might be looking at me going like, what are you talking about? If he's going to be injured half the year, why would you like this? Well, I'm hoping that half the year does not include October. Frankly, gang, certainly we need to get to October first. That's not a guarantee, as much as I would like to assume it is. It's certainly not. Certainly we would like him to help us get to October, but I think he will. I believe he will. And if he's available in October, he is a X-Factor type player in that lineup. Again, first guy off the bus type of scary big. I love Tyler O'Neill. And again, I also love the idea, if he does miss time, we talked about the young premier talent, outfield talent we have in this system. The ones that will already be up in the majors. And there's some names still down in the minors that could potentially get a look this year. And could potentially make their name known a little bit when they do get that look. Either way, I feel very confident, and we will get to that, in Cowser and Heston taking another step in their career. Mullins, I believe, will actually have a very consistent year this year. I really do. I believe in Mullins' consistency. And if it's not there, if Mullins somehow struggles again in his career, that's all right. We're set up in a way where we have talent to bring up. And I wouldn't mind getting a bigger look at them if, let's say, Tyler O'Neill has to miss a month or two at some point. Again, people might want to say that's insane. That's beyond being optimistic. How could you be excited about the idea of somebody missing time? Well, I'm not. I'm hoping he plays 145 games for us. You know what I mean? I'm hoping he plays over 100 games for us. But it might not happen. But even if it doesn't happen, he could be very productive when he is there. And when he is there, could include October. And that could be a scary piece coming back for the playoffs if, let's say, he has to miss a month or two at some point. Now, the next guy we mentioned a little when we were talking James McCann, they bring in is Gary Sanchez. I feel like one of our old rivals, man. Him and Gleyber Torres were like that name in like the 17 Yankees sort of thing that would just dominate anytime they came to Camden Yards. And certainly that was during the Dark Ages, part 2, if you want to say that. And it's been a while since Gary Sanchez was that kind of guy. You know what I mean? Like, the Yankees thought they had their future catcher for a while, and then within a year or two, he was kind of bouncing around from location to location, not a Yankee anymore. It happens. But certainly he should be better offensively, at least more consistently offensively, in our backup catcher role, which we already talked is important, especially for this Orioles club that wants to keep Rushman in the lineup by giving him days at DH more than days on the bench. Meaning that your backup catcher is going to have to play more often than your typical backup catcher on a normal team. Now, I think that there's, some tough things. But first, before I get to the negative, I do want to say that he's always had really good success hitting at Camden Yards, even in the last few years with the tough left field. Now, that's something we will touch on at the end, as you see, but certainly that tough left field isn't going to be as tough. Might not be as easy as it was when he was a Yankee, but certainly better than it was when he's visited the past few years. So I like the bring in, and I expect a solid contribution for him. Now, I could see us getting to a point where maybe his defense becomes an issue. Maybe it's going to be an issue with the fans. Maybe it'll be an issue with the management. It may rub all of us the wrong way, because I don't think he's a great defensive catcher. In fact, fairly certain if I looked at the numbers, I would say he's below average defensively as a catcher. But, again, as a backup catcher, I don't need your defense to be premier. In fact, again, it's kind of one or the other if you're talking backup catchers. Would you rather one that's a little better offensively and a little worse defensively, or one that's really good defensively but can't really hit consistently? Frankly, as much as I think defense from the catcher is important, I don't hate going the offensive route out of those two options. I also think that the Orioles are set up specifically to benefit Gary Sanchez, as they have now new bench coach Robinson Chirinos, former catcher, also Hispanic, that can really understand Gary Sanchez, get to Gary Sanchez. I think that's going to be a big benefit as far as Gary Sanchez goes. And keeping him at a production level, offensively and defensively, to make it worth having him. And frankly, there's some kids in the system besides Sam Basala who could come up in a backup catcher role and provide, let's say, exceptional defense or above average defense, while their bat might not be great. So if at some point we decide we really need to prioritize that backup catcher defense over that backup catcher offense, I think we got the guys in-house. Ethan Silas. Excuse me. I forget the kid's name right now. I believe he went to Texas or something. Well, we drafted him a couple years ago. Ethan Silas, ignore that. That's the Padres kid. He was in my head for whatever reason. I can't remember our guy. I was going to write it down. You think with all the notes that I would have wrote it down. I didn't write it down. That's okay. All right? So now let's get to some of the pitching moves. Charlie Morton, Uncle Charlie. And it's fitting, considering his curveball is maybe his best pitch, the pitch he relies on the most. 41 years old, but he hasn't really had that durability issue despite that age. Coming in for his 18th major league season, he has that knowledge. Two-time world champion. So there's a lot to like about that profile for the Orioles. This guy that's a little more finesse, a little more, or a lot more, I should say, about his control and his movement to succeed as a pitcher than just a flamethrower. Like a lot of guys maybe we have in the rotation and in the bullpen specifically. Now, clearly, it's not a long-term solution. 1 year, $15 million. The guy is 41. Could be the end of the road for him. But I think he's a great, reliable rotation piece, which after last season, with how they had to mix and match and IL every which person, would be phenomenal. He's also a great mentor to have for these guys. He really is. Everything I've heard from him is he's excited. He's going to be a great clubhouse leader. So I'm excited to have Charlie Morton. Now, we're going to get in a little bit to maybe the names I would have rather had than Charlie Morton, but I'm okay with it. I understand it's not necessarily the wow factor. You're not going, oh my goodness, we got Charlie Morton. Can you believe that? World Series, here we come. But maybe it is the guy that we should be saying, hey, we actually got Charlie Morton. And now, maybe World Series, here we come, baby. Now this is a two-time world champion. He's done it for two different franchises. He understands how it's done. He understands how you have to come to work every day and perform in order to get to that point. I'm excited. I actually am. And do I think he's going to have Cy Young numbers? Absolutely not. Do I think he's going to have all-star numbers? Probably not. Do I think he's going to have above average numbers? Yeah. Actually, I do. Because that's kind of been his career. So I'm excited for Charlie Morton. Uncle Charlie. Uncle Charlie. Another veteran pitcher, but this one not a major league veteran pitcher, is Tomoyuki Sagano. You're going to have to, stick with me as far as early pronunciations of Tomoyuki Sugano. I'm trying, gang. And, once you hear it in a game more and more and you get, you start hearing it more and more, okay, but right now it's pretty much just me having read his name a bunch of times. So, stick with me with the bad pronunciation. We're going to call him Tomo because that's what Brandon Hyde calls him. I'm excited. 1 year, $13 million, bringing him in from Japan. He's been a long-time ace in Japan. He's one of these guys that, you know what I mean? I don't want to call him the Greg Maddux of Japan, but kind of, sort of like that. This guy that he could have come to the majors multiple times, but he's stuck in Japan multiple times. I know one of them was essentially around the COVID situation, and then he was going to come and decide not to. But I think we're lucky to get this guy. Once again, big-time mentor. Even if these guys don't speak the same languages, we have the interpreter. And, you kind of be able to talk your way with the language of baseball more than you could just in a normal conversation. So I really think there's a lot of mentorship that both him and Morton have to offer this team. His big pitch is the splitter, but he throws about 7+ pitches. Typical, I feel like, of these Japanese pitchers. I really loved the signing when it happened for multiple reasons. But the number one reason why I was hopeful is because I thought he was the key to us getting Roki Sasaki, which obviously didn't happen. Sasaki went to the Dodgers, and apparently, listen, seemed like maybe people feel like he was always going to be a Dodger, despite all the reports that he wasn't interested in LA. Seemed like LA was the move. So, I don't know if we even had a conversation with the guy. I hope we did. I wish we did. I wish we brought him in. I had hopes that we were going to get both of those guys. But overall, he's at the very least the second best Japanese pitcher on the market this year. A guy that has been through it for a long time. Well over a decade. And been doing it at a very high, consistent level. I believe he was teammates with Adam Jones when Adam Jones was in Japan. Or at the very least, Adam Jones saw him in that league. So AJ approved of that. AJ signed off on this guy. Got to figure AJ knows what a major league pitcher kind of looks like. Hopefully wouldn't steer the Orioles wrong, especially after that, signing off on that. The Orioles then brought him into the organization to help. So, they trust this guy's opinion. They trust AJ's opinion. And he had nothing but positive things to say about Tomo. So I'm excited. Remember what Imanaga did last year? He wasn't the top Japanese pitcher supposedly to come to America. Yamamoto was. Yamamoto struggled. Imanaga was in the Cy Young conversation, gang. So, understand, that might be what we have. And even if he doesn't pitch necessarily to the level of Imanaga last year, I think Tomo is going to provide a lot of really positive things, both on the field and off the field, for this club. First thing he did when he came in was talk about how he's here to win a championship. And that's how the Orioles sold him to come here. Listen, we want to win a championship. We think you're a piece that can win a championship. And this guy said, yeah, I am. Now, I'm not going to lie to you. I don't follow Japanese baseball on a daily basis, or really even a yearly basis, or any basis really at all. Okay? Outside of maybe a top prospect or somebody who's potentially coming to America. Certainly, I wasn't watching a lot of Tomo these past 13 or so years. But from my research, he's never won a championship out there. Won a couple of what they call their Cy Young. Been a big-time All-Star, many-year All-Star. Never won a championship, it seemed like. So, he wants to win one. He wants a world championship. Don't think that it doesn't mean something to him, because it does. I love all the respect the players and coaches have given him. And I expect him to impart a lot of knowledge on those younger guys like I talked about. I really think he could be one of the keys to having these younger pitchers improve their pitch movement. Because remember, that's the name of the game out in Japan when you're pitching. You don't need to throw 105. You don't need to throw 100. If you're locating and you're moving, that's the name of the game, guys. And it seems like that's been the name of his game for well over a decade now. So I'm excited to see what he can impart on some of these other pitchers. Some of these little Japanese secrets Tomo has going on. And given in my research, I found that every now and then he has struggled maybe with durability. At least we don't have to worry about what's typical in these Japanese pitchers is it's customary in Japan to run a 6-man rotation. So when these guys come over to America, sometimes it's tough for them to adjust to a 5-man rotation. Adjust to that kind of turnaround. It screws with them a little, and it takes a while to develop. Well, Tomo has been, at least for a while, on a 5-man rotation from my research, gang. So it's not something he has to adjust to. He has the timing schedule as far as starts come. He has that down. So I really believe this could be a big hit, gang. Big hit. Again, maybe not as big as the Cubs got in Imanaga last year. But maybe close. Maybe Imanaga light. I don't know. Now, just a random fact that I wanted to throw out there, though. Between those two pitchers, and Charlie Morton and Tomo, they have a combined age of 76 years old, gang. So we brought in a lot of experience. We brought in a lot of adult between those two. A lot of life experience, if nothing more. And I think that's going to be really very positive on this team as a whole. So I understand those two names aren't the ones you really wanted. And we'll get to the big names that you wanted. But heck, I like them. So now the other 3 guys I'm going to mention, I'm going to run through a little quicker, just like I did the last one. Andrew Kittredge, big, decent reliever. High leverage reliever. We bring in 1 year's about 10 mil. Also an option for the club for the next year for 9 mil. That's exciting because That's just another high leverage bullpen piece that has had a lot of success the past few years. He missed some time in 22-23 with Tommy John, but he's been very effective when he's been healthy over the last 5 years or so. High leverage right-handed pitcher for the bullpen, a reliable arm, a good veteran for the clubhouse and the bullpen. Just again, it seems like that's kind of the mold the Orioles wanted when they went out in the free agent market, gang. Ramon Laureano and Dylan Carlson, two kind of backup depth outfielders for us. Laureano is kind of a cool guy, I feel like, to bring in. Obviously has fantastic defense, elite defense, absolutely elite arm, maybe one of the best arms in baseball from the outfield. And listen, hopefully he can provide decent offense. I think he's pretty much guaranteed to be the number one backup outfielder for this club. But we'll see. We'll see how it plays. You'll also have Heston in there, who I guess is, now that I think about, really the number one backup option. And again, we'll get to the roster construction. I just like Ramon Laureano. He's a guy that I've watched for years and thought, I wouldn't mind him to be an Oriole. I really wouldn't. Then you got Dylan Carlson, 1 year, $1 million. Listen, taking a flyer on a young 26-year-old who's had some tough times over the past few years, but in 2021 was third in Rookie of the Year voting. Switch hitter, battled some health issues the past few years, which kind of screwed up his measurables, even in his arm strength. But it seems like maybe he's starting to regain his athleticism, regain that strength that maybe he lost to those injuries that now he's healthy from. Still has 3 minor league options left, so I would personally expect him to start in the minors, but just add some depth. At some point, an outfielder will go down and get hurt, so I would expect Carlson to get a chance. And he's a real major league backup outfielder. Same thing for Laureano. And that's what I really like with those two. I know people were like, oh, frustrated. We signed those two and let Taters walk. What are we doing? Well, again, we want the other guys to have the real playing time. And at the very least, I truly feel these are two quality major league backup outfielders. Adding depth. Adding guys who are going to be good defensively. Adding guys who can help in those aspects. Fill in some holes when needed. And who knows, maybe provide some spark at times. We'll see. Now, why am I so happy about these Orioles? Because again, I'm going to get to why I'm disappointed, and I understand why a lot of you are disappointed. This is why I am happy, and why you should be happy too about where this team is at right now. Okay? Because I truly believe, with the guys I said left and the guys I said we brought in, we're setting ourselves up to be a better team than we were last year. We really are, gang. And ultimately, our season is going to rest on the young core taking that next step. That's what our team rests on. I get it. We'll touch on it. Why you wanted us to spend $100 million here and $100 million there and $200 million here. Gang, that's not going to win or lose anything for us. Where we are going to win or lose is our young talent, our young core, continuing to take steps forward. That's everything. And that's why I'm happy. That's why I'm excited. Because if Adley, Gunnar, Westberg, Kauser, Grayrod, Holiday, Kirstead take that next step, we'll be great. Truly. If you just tell me that all of those guys I just listed take a step forward and have better seasons, we're going to be a really good team. And if they don't, then we're probably not a good team. Whether or not we brought back Taters and Corbin and it comes down to these guys, this core. That's what our franchise is built on. That's what our franchise rests on. And I'm thrilled because that young core is as good, if not better, than anybody else's young core in the game. Truly. And if most or all take that step back like they did at the end of last year, then we're in trouble. No matter how much money we spent or who we brought in or brought back, we'd be in trouble. That's the truth. But frankly, I'm a believer in most, if not all, to at least take a small, if not massive, step forward in achieving their potential. So let's break it down for each guy real quick. Adley. Listen, we know it was a rocky year for Adley. It was good to start. Not great, but good. After the All-Star break, it was terrible. It was terrible, that second half of last year. And frankly, it culminated for me in a playoff game against the Royals. When he watched, I believe it was 0-0 to start the at-bat. And you knew he's just going to pipe this down the middle. And if Adley was sitting dead red, who knows how that would have turned the script. But he didn't. He didn't. And he didn't do it a lot last year. We know that he was the highest percentage, or I should say the lowest percentage of swings on the first pitch in all of baseball. Heck, he might still be that. I think that's a part of his game. I don't need you swinging at every first pitch, but I certainly need it to be a club in your bag, or at least have the other team think he might swing first pitch because he does it here and there. And it's a big spot, so maybe he's going to do it here. Again, we were talking Tony Tater's guessing. That's the spot. I'm okay with you guessing. But I expect Adley to get back to his past production and learn from last year's blunders. Again, expecting him to be a little more aggressive in counts, especially on the first pitch. Because I think that that's really where, I don't know, it all started to take a slide for him. And I'm still convinced maybe he was dinged up and injured in a way where he didn't really talk about it in that second half, but that's baseball. At a certain point, everybody's hurting, and everybody's a little dinged up and injured. To me, though, Adley still has that winning vibe. He's the glue, the leader that brings it all together, finds a way to make it all fit somehow. He has that winning mentality. Again, he won at Oregon State when he was there, and I've said it since we brought him in. It's like that Buster Posey effect. Somehow, this catcher just glues everything together, man. Now, Gunnar, we know, had an unbelievable year last year, and frankly, he might take a little step back. I think he's so great talent-wise, but ultimately last year was extremely good. Like, stats all across the board, damn near as good as it gets, almost historic. So do I expect him to always be putting up these historic seasons despite how good he is? No. The thing is, though, it's not always black and white. It's not like, oh, everything took a step forward and now everything's going to take a step back. Realistically, I think he will take steps forward in some areas and maybe a step or two back in some other areas. Because that's kind of just how baseball works. But Gunnar is going to be okay. More than okay. Gunnar's going to be great. I still believe that. And again, maybe he's not in the top 2 or 3 of MVP conversations. But I do think he's probably in the top 10 in MVP conversations. And frankly, if he continues to take steps forward, if he continues to top last year, he has a chance to do truly historic things as far as home runs, stolen bases, defensive stats, like everything all around. He's that kind of talent. And I think a lot of him struggling at the end of last year was kind of what happened to a lot of these hitters at the end of last year, where the pitching was so banged up and so kind of loopy that you felt you had to be that guy and win the game every single day for them. And when you're getting too tight and you're grinding a little too hard in baseball, sometimes things stop going your way. And things get a little more difficult. So, but obviously there's nothing to worry about when it comes to Gunnar Henderson. And even if I'm saying in some areas I think he takes a step back, a small step, but listen, it happens to all these guys. Some years you're hitting more home runs, well, maybe no matter how good of a home run hitter you are, maybe it does take a step back. Maybe he only has, let's say, 28 home runs this year. But maybe his average is 10, 15 points higher. Maybe he's hitting more doubles and triples. So again, some things can take a step back while other things take a step forward. Either way, I believe fully Gunnar will be a fantastic player for us this year. Jordan Westburg. I'm one of the biggest Jordan Westburg fans there is, I feel like. Truly. And I expect him to continue producing at his pre-injury level. We know he broke his hand, made him miss some time. He came back, and he's had okay games, but he just wasn't the same timing-wise. It was kind of tough. But frankly, he, to me, is one of the most underrated players in Major League Baseball. He really is. Jordan Westburg, I fully am high, and I'm so high on. And frankly, I think I'm higher than most people on Westy. He'll probably never be in real MVP talks, but I don't put it past him either, because he's just that all-around player. And we'll talk about the wall coming in, but certainly that he's one of these guys that's going to help his numbers take that next step. If all he does is produce like he did last year. And hopefully he doesn't take a fastball off the hand and miss some time. It's all it comes down to, gang. Jordan Westburg's one of the most underrated players in the entire league. And I think people are going to see. And I'm just saying this, I think I said it before, but I'm putting this out on record. Jordan Westburg, to me, has the feeling of a future World Series MVP. Just the name, just the vibe of him. Again, underrated. Don't be surprised if when one day we get there, he's the one taking home the MVP. Cole Cowser took massive steps last year, but still struggled with consistency. And I kind of think that's a bit of his vibe. You see that a lot, especially in outfielders, I feel like. You know, I had these three guys in my head. And again, they're not perfect comparisons on the player that he is. But kind of like the streaky vibe is I had Castellanos, Schwarber, and Harper vibes. Where it's like when he is hot, he's as hot as anybody. And when he cools off, man, he's as cold as it comes. Hopefully, again, you start to find a little more middle ground with more experience, and I think he will. But I also wouldn't be shocked if he is kind of that up and down streaky guy. Naturally. But that doesn't mean that I'm down on Colin Cowser. I think he can still be a great piece of a winning core. I really do. I think he will. Full-blown believe that. Grayson Rodriguez, I really believe is going to take that ace spot that Corbin Burns left. Like I talked about when we were talking Corbin Burns. Right now, it seems like there's a void. By the end of this year, there might not be that void feeling. Truly. You may not feel that we're void of an ace because of the steps that Grayson is going to take. I've been seeing it, man, the past couple years. Obviously, he started rough 2 years ago. Then he came back and was great and electric. Last year, started great, dealt with a little injury, came back, was like, okay. Then came great again and then dealt with an injury again. And unfortunately, didn't even pitch in the postseason because of that lat strain or whatever it was. But by this year, I really think he's taken that next step. Everything I hear from him, everything I see from him, he seems like he's about to go on potentially a Cy Young run, if not Cy Young voting run. you know what I mean, come fourth in Cy Young, that would be a huge step. That would be a major accomplishment. And again, that would make us feel like we have an ace. I think Grayson's going to do that. I believe that we've seen glimpses of it, like I said, in the past couple years. But he learned a lot, not just in those years, but especially from being around Corbin Burnes every day last year. The guy that was the ace. Seeing how a real major league ace works. And seeing when things aren't necessarily great, like Corbin Burnes got there for a month or so, things were tough on him. He had to rework some stuff. He had to go away from things he was comfortable with. He had to start using pitches maybe he didn't do, start quick pitching. Corbin Burnes, I think, showed him a lot on how to work through that while remaining that ace. Remaining that guy that every 5 games, you're going to go, hey, we got our guy today. You ain't beating us today because we got our guy. I really believe that by the end of this year, he's going to be a no-brainer number 1 in a rotation and our ace. And we're going to be perfectly fine with that, gang. I'm telling you, I see it. Now, Jackson Holliday certainly struggled last year. We know when he came up, it was extremely ugly. He went back down. It was even a little ugly in the minors when he went back down. He retooled. He did this. He did that. He came up, looked better. He had his moments, but it wasn't quite there. Batted under 100 on the season as a whole. I believe it was like 170 at bats or so. Listen, it happens. He was very, very young. But don't be surprised if he's the starting second baseman in the All-Star game for the AL this year. Yeah, I said it. I'm telling you, gang. We're going to talk about how jacked up he came into camp looking, but between his contact, his speed, his power, his defense, I think we're going to see Jackson start living up to the hype and be like, this is the number 1 prospect that we were told about. This is the prince that was promised, sort of thing. And I think we're going to start seeing it come together this year. I really do. I think that he learned a lot. I think that he was able to kind of go into the offseason, refocus, retool, rework kind of things that didn't work and did work. This is a kid that was born in a major league clubhouse. He understands that it's not always going to come easy. And you really got to work at it, and you really got to outthink and figure out what's going to work. Don't be surprised if you see him hitting 280 with 30 stolen bases and 15 home runs and in contention for a Gold Glove. And frankly, those projections I just said are modest. This is a kid that could easily, well, not easily, but this is a kid who could certainly bat over 300. This is a kid who could certainly hit 20-plus home runs. It's a kid that could certainly steal 40, 50 stolen bases. I'm telling you, gang. Believe in Jackson Holliday again. I'm telling you, I'm promising you, we're going to start seeing it click. And technically, I already have a bet in for the kid for MVP that I don't think is going to hit. I'm not expecting for it to hit. But might have more legs than the odds are telling me right now, and that you guys are thinking about right now. I get it. You're looking at me side-eyed. Jackson Holliday MVP. Yeah, right. Yeah, probably you're right. Probably not. But maybe. But just maybe, gang. So again, this is a full-rounded Major League Baseball player who's just hitting drinking age, gang. Don't be surprised when you start seeing the real Jackson Holliday show up this season. And then the last of the bunch that we're going to talk about, Heston Kjerstad, I really believe will finally break camp on the roster and start taking that next step. I'm not expecting the world from Heston Kjerstad this season. I still think he needs a lot of experience in the majors to start finding himself, like a lot of these guys do. But he's shown some success already in the majors. Nothing amazing, but not really a liability truly either. I kind of am expecting last year Colton Cowser's season for Heston this year, which, frankly, gang, would put him right in the conversation of Rookie of the Year. So, certainly solid. All right. And I think he's going to have some rough patches like Cowser had. But I also think there's going to be a couple periods where he's as hot as they come, gang. I really do. So listen, like a lot of these young guys, there will be some droughts where, listen, things aren't easy. And those hits aren't coming. But I really think he has it in him to have those stints where things are great. And maybe it's less extreme on both ends than Cowser was last year, which frankly I'd be okay with. I'd be okay if instead of him living right here, he's living more right there. And it's like, hey, we're seeing good stuff. Maybe not unbelievable stuff, but we're seeing good stuff. And even in the bad, it's not that bad. I think typically for a young player finally getting somewhat full playing time, that's kind of pretty normal to expect. But he's a great prospect, gang. And he's gotten overlooked, and finally, he's starting to have his moment. And he's a little older than a lot of these prospects are when they're starting to come up and break through. So don't be surprised if maybe that age, that experience, helps him outperform what I just set down. Now, that's why I'm excited. That's why I'm happy. Now, why am I disappointed? Like a lot of you guys out there. Because there is some disappointment in this offseason for me. Well, let me get this off the bat. We were never going to be in contention to sign Juan Soto, gang. I don't think many Orioles fans thought we would be or hoped we would be. Hell, it kind of would have made a little bit of sense, even where the team is aligned and everything. Like, I could have made the case. Maybe we should have tried to sign Juan Soto. But gang, we're not competing when these guys are getting $200 million, let alone $700-800 million. And frankly, I don't think Juan Soto's the type of player that I would want to give that to. Really. Shohei Ohtani, awesome. I would absolutely sign up for that. Juan Soto, you might look at me like I'm crazy, but I don't think he's deserving of that much money. I think he's a little one-dimensional. At the very least, as far as all of baseball is concerned, like one-dimensional is just really hitting. And frankly, a lot of what I think he brings to the table is his discipline and his eye and the walks he takes. I'm not going to get into Juan Soto too much, gang. We're already hour 20 deep into this. But listen, obviously that's the biggest money. And I don't think many people were asking to go sign Juan Soto. You didn't have to spend a lot of money or go after him to spend a lot of money this offseason. There were other names, and I know you guys wanted Max Fried, Blake Snell, hell, even Corbin Burns. I don't really think we were ever going to match those numbers, gang. Sure, if this was last year and Snell was willing to take a 1, maybe 2-year deal, yeah, I think we might have been interested. Giving him 6, 7, 8 years, whatever. Like, again, I don't want to do that for Blake Snell. Even if he's in Cy Young talks every year, and even if he's really good, you're essentially getting 5 innings out of him every time, which is okay. But if you're going to pay someone $200 million, I want you to pitch 6, 7, 8. At least sometimes. He rarely ever even sees the 6th inning. Max Fried, to me, it kind of has the vibe of like when the Phillies signed Zach Wheeler, and you were like, this is a guy that kind of battled some injuries and he's had a little ups and downs, and he's not great. How's he getting this number? And now you blink and you're like, Zach Wheeler's one of the best pitchers in baseball. Maybe the best pitcher in baseball. Probably not the, but some people would argue. I've seen it on MLB Network this offseason. Some people have argued. So, at the very least, he's up there as one of the best pitchers. And the Phillies believed him. I kind of see that for Max Fried a little. And I think the Yankees may have gotten themselves a great pitcher for the next few years. However, they gave him like 7, 8 years. Again, you start paying these pitchers 8 years, like, that's not the name I want to do it for. Frankly, if we had Max Fried, again, I would probably be pitching this whole Zach Wheeler comparison to you. But I also would be like, but it wouldn't shock me if kind of Max Fried didn't live up to that contract, even with a couple good years. So I get it. I desperately wanted Roki Sasaki. I did. That was my number one target, Roki Sasaki. And unfortunately, it seemed like a pipe dream because I don't even know if we were in the conversation, but even the people in the conversation may not have ever had a chance unless their name was the Los Angeles Dodgers. Which makes sense. If I'm him, I'd probably go to the Dodgers too without thinking twice. Especially with Ohtani, Yamamoto. That seems really cool from that guy's perspective. But everything we heard leading up to the decision gave us Orioles fans, at least me, some hope that maybe we could get in it. Because it wasn't like Yamamoto where it's the highest price tag. All these teams are pretty much capped within each other. Because of when he got posted in his career. So it wasn't this $100-something million contract. Gives me some hope that we were going to do it. We signed Tomo. That gives me some hope. He talks about how he likes small markets. That gave me some hope. Talks about how he didn't want to be a Dodger and didn't want the spotlight of that. That gives me hope. Talked about how he wanted to be the face of the franchise sort of guy, at least pitching-wise. That gave me hope. Again, it was a pipe dream. That's the number one thing I'm disappointed in this offseason, but I can't go too hard on that disappointment. Because at the end of the day, gang, seems like everything I'm hearing is he was just going to go to the Dodgers. And they were just all blowing smoke, this, that, to try and take, the spotlight away from him just going to LA. Now, maybe the other thing that I'm really disappointed in is, and I mentioned this before, how I don't think Charlie Morton or even Tomo would have been my first options on what we were doing with bringing in veteran pitchers on one-year deals. I would have rather one or two of these names: Verlander, Scherzer, Evaldi, Walker Buehler, who's even younger than all those guys. Those would have really intrigued me. And I think I would, not only personally, but just as a fan group, Birdland in general, would be feeling a little better about the starting pitching situation if we had a premier name like one of those guys in there. Unfortunately, I don't think we ever even looked at any of them or considered any of them. I think Evaldi maybe we considered more than any of them, and maybe for good reason. I think that Morton and Tomo can outperform all four of those guys. But I would have really liked Walker Buehler. That was a name to me that made so much sense. Coming off of the World Championship last year, it looked like he was back, man. He had that attitude. He had that vibe. He seemed like he was that stud pitcher again that he was just a few years ago. Sometimes it's a mental thing, and it seemed like that was the case with Walker Buehler. And it sucks even more for him going in division to the Red Sox. That's devastating. Because I think that they might have gotten a bargain in Walker Buehler. That's a name I would have absolutely loved. Scherzer, coming back to the Baltimore, Maryland, D.C. area. Made a lot of sense to me. Now, can he stay healthy? Who knows? He may wind up making 3 starts for the Blue Jays. But again, it goes in division, too, to make it even worse. Because that's a name, out of nowhere, if you get one of these good seasons out of him, and he's healthy, boy, does that name in your rotation start looking really good. And then you get to the postseason, and you just need him for Game 3, Game 4 somewhere, and you're like, God, we got Max Scherzer on the mound, this bulldog. God, that feels good. Verlander. Listen, I made this case last year. that I wanted Verlander because he has the ties to Mike Elias, and I really thought that a lot of that made sense to bring him in. Goes to the Giants. But listen, again, I don't even think they looked at Verlander. Again, at the end of it, possibly could only make a few starts this year. Or could have one of those big seasons. Because don't forget, this time last year, right? The Braves made a deal from the Red Sox to get Chris Sale. And everyone's like, yeah, Chris Sale, huge name. But he's done, dude. He's done. What are you expecting to get from Chris Sale? Well, they got a Cy Young out of Chris Sale. So, listen, and that might be done come this year. Chris Sale might be now washed up. You might only get 1, maybe 2 good more years out of a stud, elite, former, Cy Young ace, elite pitcher. You might only have a year or 2 left in that guy. But I would have loved these Orioles to be like, hey, we're going to bring in Verlander and Scherzer and see if they can regain it for 1 year. See if we can get one of those Chris Sale type seasons out of one of these guys. I would have loved it. And listen, again, Morton and Tomo, I think are much safer options. I think are much more reliable options, which coming off of last year probably feels good. Because while reading those names in Oriole camp would be awesome, you're also just waiting for the shoe to drop where he's out. With these guys, hopefully, knock on wood, that's not the case, gang. They're reliable, they're consistent, they're durable, and we know the base level of what we're getting, not expecting it to go to that upper echelon, but not expecting it to drop to the abyss either. So that was a little disappointing, but again, while I'd be more excited about some other names, doesn't necessarily mean that throughout the season, I'd be more excited about having those guys than the ones we have. Now, I also thought, and it's not that I'm disappointed this didn't happen, but I thought that there were some interesting moves that could be made with first base. Now, I really like Ryan Mountcastle and Ryan O'Hearn. I think that's a great kind of platoon duo. I'm in favor, especially with the long left coming back, should help Mountie. I'm big on those two, okay? So I don't want what I'm about to say to come off like I'm calling for these moves. But I also saw some, things setting up to where there were intriguing moves to be made. Now, had we, let's say, traded Mountie, we could have done that and brought in a nice pitcher. Something along the lines of a Luis Castillo or one of those Mariner pitchers or someone along those lines. That would have been intriguing. And then you're like, well, first base, what do we do? Well, we wouldn't even have to hand the reins completely over to O'Hearn, let's say, if he's left, and Kobe Mayo. We could have maybe brought in somebody like Goldschmidt, who signed a 1-year deal with the Yankees, like Pete Alonso, who signed a 2-year deal with the Mets, I think with an opt-out, but maybe we could have gotten him for a big number for 1 year, man. And I'm not a huge Pete Alonso guy, but there's some intrigue with that. That's kind of this roster what if that intrigues me. And as he was sitting out there, I was thinking, there's something maybe to that move. Ultimately, though, I'm very happy to have Mountie and O'Hearn back at first base. And to wrap up this segment, I understand that fans wanted the big splash and expected Elias and the new owners to just throw around money. But that's not exactly the blueprint, right? And let me just break it down to how I view it is the last few years, even though we were very successful, let's say the last 3 years, beating our win total all 3 seasons, making the playoffs in 2 of them, winning the division 2 years ago. Ultimately, this team was ahead of schedule when it came to that, in my mind. I could argue that this year, this season coming up, was what the blueprint had said is the first year we would expect to compete for the division in the playoffs. Like, I really think that Mike Elias and his people a few years ago pegged this year as the first year they were sort of going for it and to expect winning. Now, I also think it's important to keep our long-term future money commitments minimal. You know, you're signing Fried to 8 years or Burns to 7 years, Santander to 5 years. That's not keeping that future money flexible and minimal. In order to keep this core together long-term, we need to minimize the amount of money that's on the books for future years. Because, yeah, we're 3 to 5 years away from really everyone in this core becoming free agent eligible. But even arbitration years get expensive, gang. And a lot of these guys, once they start hitting arbitration, are going to start racking up big dollar figures in those arbitration numbers. It's essentially going to be like we're paying post-free agent money for at least 2 or 3 years on some of these guys leading up to free agency. And obviously that's unless we extend them through the arbitration years and into some free agent years. We'll see. Obviously, there's a couple guys in Gunnar and Jackson that are Boras clients, so don't expect those guys, but maybe an Adley, a Kauser, or a Westberg we can lock up earlier and kind of be able to set up the blueprint into keeping all of them, including the Boras clients, right? But it doesn't mean we can just add payroll and talent. It has to be done properly, gang, okay? Like, we can't just willy-nilly be like, what are the top free agents this year? We're going to give them a ton of money. Because then you're going to blink, and in 2-3 years, you're going to have a lot of money on the books. And you're going to now need to pay these players. And I get it. You're probably watching going, Rubenstein and Ripken and all these guys have money. They want to spend money, they've said. Yeah, they do. For winning teams. You don't want to just spend a bunch of money and then have to get out of these contracts and eat the money, and then you're just paying a bunch of guys that aren't even on your team anymore. And then you're not going to trust your guys when they want to spend the money, and then maybe you can't keep all of the core. You got to let some of them go because you have all this dead money on the books. Or this older pitcher who's still good enough to have the roster spot, but isn't producing to the level of an ace anymore. So this roster is set up to blossom from within, okay? I think that's the best way to put it. We're blossoming from within. We need to truly find out what these players are going to be in order to buy what we need. We want to buy players that complement the roster we have, but we need time to figure out exactly what that is. Exactly who these guys are. Because I can project Gunnar Henderson or Adley Rutschman or Colton Kauser or Jordan Westberg or Jackson Holland. I can project all of this. That doesn't mean it's going to come to fruition. It could be better. It could be worse. We could wind up being like, okay, well, while he's a good player and he's really solid, that's a position that ultimately we're not going to keep in the core. That's a guy we're not going to wind up keeping because he only brings a few areas. He only brings this to the team. And if we're going to pay this number, we want to bring more to the team. So then we're going to go out and find somebody else to fulfill what we need to complement the core that we're going to keep, which might be all of them, which still leaves positions and spots to complement that core. Even if they all work out, maybe we need more average and contact. Maybe we wind up needing more power. It all comes into play, and you don't want to commit too early to too many guys for the future before you have a clear picture of what to expect from this core. And I think a lot of these guys are still figuring out who they are as a player. I'd rather us hold the chips to see exactly what we have and then splurge on a special player or two when they come available. Maybe Vladdy Jr. next year. Hey, we had Vladdy Sr. It's not like the Guerreros are adverse to coming to Baltimore. Now, sure, Vladdy Sr. did it at the very tail end of his career, whereas Vladdy Jr. seems like age-wise, he's just reaching his peak, the beginning of his peak. But who knows? You're telling me that you'd rather spend a bunch of money this offseason on guys that might not be worth it when we could potentially spend and buy Vladdy Jr. next year? Now, given I did see a clip on him, or from him, taking batting practice, and it was behind him, like facing the pitcher behind the plate, and kind of what he was wearing, it was Blue Jays colors, blue and white, but it kind of had the vibe of like a Dodger, and then I'm like, who am I kidding? He's just going to be a Dodger next year, which probably is going to be the case. Hate to break it to you, but who knows? Who knows? If we can keep our chips and keep our assets, who knows? That's a conversation maybe I'll dive into throughout this year. If I feel like Vladdy Jr. is going to be worth it, we'll see. All right, guys. We've already been talking for over an hour and a half. But I promise we're going to run through some of these last topics much quicker. Those were a lot deeper topics in the beginning. A lot of these are a lot quicker to go, all right? So stick with us. We're wrapping up in a little. All right. Now, typical early spring training talk is all these players are in the best shape of their life. And frankly, personally, I think a lot of these guys look like they're in great shape. We talked about Tyler O'Neill being in great shape. Gary Sanchez looked like he came in pretty good shape too, compared to what maybe I've seen him in past years. Adley, Gunnar, Kowser, Westberg, Grayrod, all personally look stronger and like leaner in a strong, muscular way. Like, I think all these guys took that negative experience last year and built their bodies up more and more. So I'm excited, obviously, about all these guys. The number one guy, though, I need to talk about physique-wise just for a second is Jackson Holliday. I mean, he went into the offseason. He talked about how he was wearing down towards the end of last year, how he was breaking down a little, how he didn't feel strong. He was down under 190 as far as weight goes. And listen, he's a smaller guy, so weight, his weight isn't going to be crazy no matter what. But boy, did he come in jacked up. And from what I heard, him and Matt Holliday, his dad, went into this offseason literally with the goal of looking more jacked. Now, listen, again, just like Tyler O'Neill, sometimes that's not the best for a baseball player. You want to be flexible. You want to be plyometric. You want to be pliable, I think is the better way to say that. But frankly, I mean, he is a beast. And already in his face, he's looking less like a kid and more like an adult, which again, 21 years old is crazy. You look at his forearms, you look at his traps, you look at his shoulders. This kid is jacked to the yolks. Apparently, he's just been eating ground beef and lifting heavy weights. And I know he's doing hitting drills because I've been watching the videos this offseason. Jackson Holliday, like I said, don't be surprised if he's the starting second baseman in this All-Star game this year for the AL. Gosh, I'm excited. Talk about potential All-Stars. The Mountain is back. The return of the Mountain. Felix Bautista is finally back. And he's talking that he's very confident he's going to regain his form this season. Coming off of the Tommy John, missed all of last year, missed the postseason 2 years ago. Listen, it was devastating. But looks like we're through the woods a bit with it. Now, we're not completely out of the woods, but we can see the daylight. They're going to take it easy on him this spring. He's probably not going to pitch in many, if any, spring training games. But they're confident that he'll be there for opening day, which, frankly, all I need to hear. It's a massive addition And when he was shut down completely, we had to deal with the whole Kimbrel fiasco last season. We saw how that worked out. Remember, when he was our closer 2 years ago, it was an 8-inning game, gang. If you had the lead after 8 innings, you won the game. Because Felix Bautista was damn near perfect every time he went out there. He's an intimidating force. And I think he's going to come back and be potentially the best closer in the game. If you want to say Mason Miller or Devin Williams, who I actually think is going to be a head case for the Yankees. Listen, I watched them in Milwaukee last year, and the wheels seemed like they were starting to fall off a bit mentally. So New York typically doesn't heal those wounds, but we'll see. Either way, I mean, you're talking about a top 5. Obviously, Clause's up there. Talking of, at the minimum, a top 5 closer in the league if Felix Bautista is healthy and pitching. And everything I hear, everything I see seems like it's leading to Felix Bautista being back to himself and being one of the most dominating closers in baseball, which is a beautiful thing, gang. It's a beautiful thing. So welcome back to the mountain, Felix Bautista. So this year, unlike last year, we really have a lack of camp battles. Last year, doing these episodes during spring training were very easy. And this one, obviously, we're going on 2 hours damn near. So it's pretty easy to talk on this episode too. But I really feel like these spring training episodes, I might have to start pulling little tidbits. I might start telling some stories here. I might have a tale or two Orioles related in there because we really don't have the camp battles that we had last year. I mean, last year you had starting pitchers, you had outfielders, you had infielders, you had damn near everybody except the catching position and maybe first base in position battles. And unsure who was going to make the team. We were calling for Urias's head. We were calling for this guy's head. Like, listen, it happens. This year, we really don't have those. It's much more straightforward. In part because we traded some of these guys. There was log jams all over, and we traded the Stowers and the Ortiz and the Hall. And we traded some of these guys away, gang. Also, we also let some guys go that were causing log jams. And the guys we brought in really aren't guys that get in the way of any other prospects at the moment. Also, we have some injuries this year, just like we did last year. But this year, the injuries are kind of helping avoid the situations where there's these camp battles. Better or worse, it's just the truth. We know Bradish isn't going to be around for a while, if at all, this season. Hopefully, really hopeful, maybe he can come back around the All-Star break, maybe a month after. Come back for the end of the season and postseason. Orioles are very cautious with these guys, so there's a good chance maybe we don't see Bradish again till next year this time. It's possible, gang. You know, John Means, we let walk. Let walk a few of these guys. Jorge Mateo still rehabbing from the nasty elbow injury that ended his season last year. And I think that's one that if the Orioles were in a spot where they really needed Jorge Mateo on this roster, he probably would be able to start opening day for them. Instead, I think that they're taking advantage, in a positive way, of him coming back from that injury. They're going to let him fully take his time, fully do his rehab, fully heal, and buy them maybe an extra month or so before they have to make a roster decision on how to get Mateo back on the team. And frankly, at that time, might be the end of Urias as far as the Orioles are concerned. As it is now, I think they're going to take their time with Mateo to avoid making that decision until they have to. Trevor Rogers, who we brought in last year from the Marlins and disappointed, I actually think that good things might come from Trevor Rogers this season. I've been hearing he's really worked on his lower body strength, has really reworked himself, trying to get that velocity back that he had in his career a year or two ago. But we know he had an ugly Orioles career thus far when they brought him in from the trade deadline and paid a pretty penny frankly, as far as talent goes, to the Marlins for him. It was ugly. It wasn't the deadline move that we wanted, was as fans. It wasn't the deadline move that we needed as a team because he didn't succeed very much. And that's another guy who possibly could have been ready for opening day, but they're going to milk that a little. Let him take his time so things can shuffle out a little. Things can sort themselves out on the roster a little, and they don't have to make that decision going into the season. Chase McDermott certainly has options left and probably will start the year back in the minors, but he's dealing with a little injury too, and it seems like he's, from what I hear, like 2 weeks behind everybody else. Now, either way, I think he was headed towards the minors, but that's a guy who impressed last year. It's a prospect who might have even jumped Cade Povich for the top pitching prospect in the organization. So, frankly, Chase McDermott, it's very interesting what we could see from him later this year. But again, being a few weeks behind, he's not going to be an option for opening day. Tyler Wells, kind of in the Kyle Bradish situation, didn't have Tommy John last year, but dealt with a very similar injury. Coming back, rehabbing, he certainly isn't going to be seen until probably midway through the season, if at all this year. Now, if you remember me from last year before he got hurt and I had to stop talking about him, you know I might be the president of Tyler Wells fan club. I think he's a stud. I think he's one of these guys that's just waiting to boom in this league. But we're going to need some time for him to at least come back to see if that's going to be a reality that ever happens. So Tyler Wells, again, is a guy that could easily be pushing for a roster spot if he was healthy. Maybe we see him later this year. Maybe we don't see him till this time next year. But again, injuries are preventing those camp battles from happening like they did this time last year. Now, we just talked about the rotation, so we're going to shake out the rotation. I thought had a nice ring to it. And the fifth starter could have a battle for it, but doubtful. Truly. Like, it seems very unlikely we don't know the starting five for the Orioles outside of potential injuries. Hopefully, knock on wood, that doesn't happen. Assuming everyone stays healthy, we have a top four that seems locked. Grayrod, Eflin, Morton, and Tomo. And it seems like that fifth one, who realistically could get slotted as the third pitcher going into the season, as far as the order that they go in, is Dean Kremer. I like Dean Kremer a lot. I think he's, in many ways, last year took a step back from the two previous years. Like, if you look statistically, you might be like, oh, it looks like he kind of took a step back last year. But overall, from watching pretty much every start he had, I still felt he showed real signs of growth. And he still had a positive WAR on the season. So he was still a positive player for us. And again, it just seemed like at points he was really starting to kind of figure it out a little. Things were starting to click and he was starting to take strides. So I wouldn't be surprised if he has a sneaky good year. And by the end of the season is viewed as a solid 3 by the end of the season. Like, to people around baseball looking at the Orioles rotation, you're like, well, they got a solid middle of the rotation guy in Dean Kremer. And I could see that. I think more than anyone, too, he might benefit from having Morton and Tomo around. Because, again, they're more the finesse and control pitchers. And not to say Dean can't ramp it up a little, but he's certainly not throwing 100. You know, like, he's the type of guy that can benefit learning just a little more movement and a little more control of his stuff. I think could go a long way for him. So don't be surprised if he has a sneaky good year, not in Cy Young talks, but just in the idea of you're like, hey, he ended the season 15-8 with like a 3.7 ERA, 3.9 ERA, and you're like, solid number 3 starter. Now, if you did have those 5, okay? Grayrod, Eflin, Morden, Tomo, and Kramer. You'd have an all-righty staff. Not necessarily the best thing, but also not the end of the world. At some point, a lefty's going to get a start, whether it's because of injury or just trying to give guys an extra day here and there. Cade Povich, Trevor Rogers, both will, I believe, get starts at some point. Wouldn't be surprised if, who knows, they go out and make a move for a lefty or not. Now, the thing about the all-righty staff is that kind of goes against Mike Elias's recent preferences. I know in the past year or two, he's tried his best to have a lefty starter and more lefty pitchers because that takes the lefties batters out of the lineup for the other team, adds more righties, but that was all with the deeper left field, okay? The left field that really benefited a lefty pitcher on a righty batter. So now and we'll touch a little on it at the end, bringing the wall in a little might now have gotten rid of that preference. Heck, it's one of the reasons I felt like they traded for Trevor Rogers over maybe a couple other names at the deadline last year. Is because they wanted this lefty. They had this idea where we're going to construct a pitching staff with more left-handed pitchers. That's what we're prioritizing to try and take advantage of the deep left field wall. Well, now, again, we'll talk about it, but less of a factor. Now maybe there is no preference. Now maybe they think both fields are going to play evenly, which frankly is positive for roster construction. Gives you more options, but also it allows you to just get the better player instead of being like, hey, we think this player might play better for us because they're a lefty. Instead, we can just be like, hey, we're just going to get the player we think is the better player because they're going to play the same now. We'll see, but that's certainly shaking out the rotation. And again, the roster essentially seems set, okay? And I'm just going to run you down the 26-man roster and the couple guys that are like vying for a position that I don't really think is open, okay? Now, catcher, you have Adley and Sanchez. Both are going to catch, obviously, but be DHing at times as well, something we talked about earlier. Mounting and O'Hearn, kind of the platoon at first base, but they'll both get reps at DH also. So don't put that past the Orioles either. Jackson should be able to easily win the job and stick at second base all year. That's my projection. Just good enough, at least, to be the everyday second baseman. Then you have Gunnar at short, obviously. Westberg then at third, obviously. We've talked in length about my love for those two. Utility, out of camp, you're going to have Ramon Urias. And like we said, Jorge Mateo, once healthy, could maybe take that spot. He might be able to have both on the roster and you drop an outfielder at one point. It kind of is all going to depend on how guys are playing and how they want to construct this roster moving forward. I think Jorge Mateo is a can't-miss player on this team as far as utility goes. Certainly he can play shortstop on Gunnar's off days, something that, sure, Jackson or even Westberg or Urias could fill in, but certainly Mateo is far and away the best backup shortstop they have defensively. And I just think Jorge brings that spark that maybe Urias doesn't necessarily provide. I love Jorge Mateo. I really do. I like Ramon Urias, but I love Mateo. So, again, eventually, in a month probably, into the season at least, Mateo will be back. But I think out of camp, since he's hurt still, or at least they're going to milk it like he's hurt, Ramon Urias out of camp will be the utility backup infielder. Your outfield will basically be locked with the four guys of Kowser, Mullins, O'Neill, and Heston, I believe. Again, Heston hasn't guaranteed to make the team. I think the other three are guaranteed to make the team. But I believe Heston is pretty much locked in unless things really turn ugly, which I don't see because I think he's a really good player. Those four. Now, with only one backup infielder, you're going to have a second backup outfielder. So that's where Laureano comes in. Very good defensively, very good defensive arm, like we've talked about. Simply put, he's just a really solid major league fifth outfielder. Truly. Now, you got Dylan Carlson also, who's kind of the next man up, but like we touched on, he has all three minor league options left, and I think that just makes more of the move. Obviously, Cowser and Heston, who have options, are more those cornerstone type players to the organization, obviously, than a Laureano or Carlson. Assuming Carlson doesn't pop and become a superstar out of nowhere, which frankly would be amazing. And then we'd probably drop Laureano. But the point is that Mullins and O'Neill are going to be on the major league roster. Cowser and Heston are certainly, I believe, going to be on the major league roster. And then Carlson's just the guy that's still has options. And is kind of in this spot where eventually one will get injured and we'll use you for depth. And again, if you pop, you pop. And you might be able to stay and stick. You'll get that opportunity at some point, but it won't be out of camp. So then we move to the pitchers. You have Greyrod, Eflin, Morton, Tomo, and Kramer, like we just talked about. Povich could compete for the fifth spot, but I doubt it. Certainly McDermott could have competed as well for the fifth spot, but he seems a few weeks away. Tyler Wells could have competed for the last spot, but he's hurt. Trevor Rogers would have been competing for sure for that last spot, but he is also hurt. Plus, all of those guys I just mentioned, Povich, McDermott, Rogers, all have options. Wells, I don't think, has any more options, but again, we might not even see him this season at any point. Same goes for Kyle Bradish. So, starting rotation seems pretty locked. As far as the bullpen, obviously you got the Mountain, Batista as the closer. Then you got the relief roles of Cano, Aiken, Sir Anthony Dominguez, Kittredge, Perez, and Soto, with Suarez kind of being the long man. I mean, guys, certainly there's some pitchers in camp that can pop and draw interest and maybe make a push for the team, but I just don't see any way. That's not our bullpen on opening day, outside of maybe an injury that hopefully doesn't come. Sure. We will obviously have injuries at some point in the season. You're going to have depth like always, and guys are going to come up and get their chance. But the team I just mentioned right there is a phenomenally good team. The only way that you're down on that roster is if you don't believe in the core that we've talked about taking those next steps. As long as you believe that that core is going to continue to grow and get better, like I believe, dang, this is an unbelievable roster. I think the bullpen might be one of the most slept-on bullpens coming into the season. I think that's phenomenal. The starting pitchers also might be one of the most slept-on starting pitching rotations out there in baseball. Again, I think Grayrod's going to end the season as a bona fide ace. Maybe not a top 5 or 10 pitcher in the league, but one of the top 25 to 30 starting pitchers in the league. A bona fide ace? I think so. Eflin, you know I love. You know I have an affinity for Eflin, and I think he's going to have a very nice year with these Orioles. We talked Morton and Tomo. I think both will be very reliable and solid. And we talked about how Kramer, he could wind up being a very solid number 3 in the rotation. And frankly, coming out of camp, might win the number 3 gig in the order that they go in. All right, guys, so that brings us to our last topic. We touched on it a little, so we're going to, end it in a few minutes. So stick with me. The Great Wall No Mo. All right? They're moving in the giant, deep left field wall back to something more normal. Certainly it's not where it was when it was the tiny short porch in left. But it's not going to be the Great Wall of Baltimore anymore. It's not going to be Waltimore anymore. And that's a great thing, gang. Because one, it was a liability. It sucked for our offense. And moving it in without going too far in should help the offense, should help these guys like Mounty and Westy and Adley and O'Neal and Sanchez and all these right-handed or switch-hitting guys, anytime they're from the right side, that should help them. It really will. I saw a graphic when they did it, and you'd be surprised how many home runs were robbed by Mounty and Westy and Adley, or maybe you wouldn't be surprised. Because if you watch the games like me, it felt like it stole more home runs for us than saved more home runs for us. Certainly there were those times where we'd be pitching and groove on and they would tee off and you're like, ugh. And then it would fall short and Cowser would catch it right at the wall. Like, certainly there were those moments. But it seemed like a lot more were going against us than for us. And again, they showed this graphic, and I'll try and find it to where it was last year or the last 3 years or whatever, the home runs that were stolen had the wall been where it's going to be instead of where it was at. And it was a lot. It was like 3 to 5 home runs for each of those guys. That's a lot of runs, gang. It's a lot of production. And that's a lot of, different games that could have been changed and affected that maybe went the wrong way because that ball didn't get out. Hopefully, it's, like I said, going to benefit our hitters without causing a liability for the pitchers like it used to be. I'm happy also to see that long wall and left go because it didn't feel like Camden Yards as much, right? Like, I get it. It used to be this bandbox. It used to be this little tiny, wall was so close and everything would fly out. Pop-outs would get out. So, we're not going to have that, but this is going to feel a little more like home. Little more like the Camden Yards we all know and love, and I'm excited for that. So, sayonara to the Great Wall of Baltimore. I really hope the new dimensions and everything benefit us, obviously, more than hinders us. And we'll see if they need to tweak it over the years. Guarantee they're going to. Clearly, they're showing initiatives to try and tweak it in a way that's more beneficial as a whole than it is a negative. All right, gang, so that's going to do it for episode 40. The boys are back. And boy, does it feel good to be back. I know it was a while. I know it was a long episode. I know it's been months since we've been on to talk, gang. But I promise you, again, episodes every Monday and Thursday moving forward this season. And we're not going to have that break, gang. This is where we're at. This is what we're doing. This is what we love to do. It's a passion. And we have a lot of great stuff coming. Like I said, we should have guests this season, interviews. I want the fan interaction. I want you to hit me with questions and comments. I'm going to be talking about you guys on here. All right, I want the back and forth. And hopefully we can even get a number where you guys can leave a voicemail. I have that in the works as well. Gang, I couldn't be any happier sitting here talking Orioles baseball to you once again. Thrilled to be back. I've been itching. I've been dying to talk Orioles baseball, but sometimes you can't force things. You got to let them come when the time is right. And the time's right now, gang. I love it. I'm excited. I'm thrilled to be back. And I will see you coming forward on your social media every single day. Best believe it. You're going to be seeing me and episodes here every Monday and Thursday. Gang, welcome back to Talkin Orioles Baseball Podcast. You have a good one, Birdland. Let's go, O's.